right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking what is honestly the ultimate historical paradox. We're looking at a huge question. How did a fractured, wandering desert society manage to build an incredibly sophisticated empire stretching all the way from Spain to India? And to do it at a speed that, even today, is completely unprecedented. We always hear about the sweeping battles, sure, but what we're really going to uncover here is the absolute administrative genius that made a massive scale-up like this even possible. Picture the Arabian Peninsula right before the 7th century. The population was deeply, deeply divided by tribal rivalries and endless blood feuds. So how on earth do you go from that intense fragmentation to a unified global superpower in literally just a few decades? Well, the answer we find in the sources wasn't just the arrival of a new faith. It was actually a revolutionary new political technology that completely rewired how human society functioned. So, Act 1, From Tribes to Ummah. This whole paradigm shift kicks off in 622 CE. Think of it as the definitive year zero, known as the Hijra. Before this point, survival meant your loyalty belonged entirely to your bloodline, which naturally resulted in endless raiding between rival tribes. But then, through a brilliant document called the Pact of Madinah, a radical new strategy was introduced. It completely wiped out those decentralized tribal bloodlines and replaced them with the Ummah. This was a unified confederacy bound by a mutual defense pact. Suddenly, your place in society was defined by a shared ideological loyalty, not who your ancestors were. So all that chaotic, internal warring energy, it was unified and immediately redirected outward. Which leads us to Act 2, centralizing the state. Okay, so how did this brand new community rapidly scale into an institutionalized superpower? We can track this lightning-fast evolution through the early caliphate's 4 rightly guided leaders. It all starts with Abu Bakr. When some tribes actually tried to secede after the prophet's death, Abu Bakr laid down a crucial rule. Secession equals treason. He forced reunification. Then the mantle passes to Umar, and Umar was a true master strategist. He moved away from minimalist rule and actively structured the military organs of a vast empire, essentially turning this newly unified community into a formidable regional power. The crucial takeaway here is how Umar actually managed this sudden, explosive wave of conquest. He brought in a strict policy of strategic isolationism. He literally built entirely new garrison cities from scratch, places like Basra and Kufa, just to house his Arab warriors. Why did that? Well, he knew the military edge of his troops would totally erode if they got used to the soft luxuries of established cities. Plus, keeping his conquering minority physically separated really minimized social friction with the massive local majorities they just took over. It's a fascinating lesson in organizational management, honestly. It shows you how to scale rapidly without losing your core identity. But, governing these vast new territories meant they needed highly flexible laws. Beyond the primary text and past precedents, Umar pioneered a brilliant fourth step, qiyas, or analogical reasoning. So, for example, if the primary sources didn't explicitly lay out a punishment for drinking alcohol, Umar just used logic. Intoxication leads to slander, the sources did prescribe the lash for slander, therefore the punishment for drinking became the lash. It acted like a jurisprudential stencil. It allowed them to expand governance into completely unforeseen areas without having to constantly rewrite their foundational code from scratch. Moving right along to Act 3, financing a global empire. You can't sustain this kind of unbelievable scale without aggressively building up your economic engines, right? So they developed a dual taxation system that was an absolute masterstroke of administrative tolerance. First, you have the zakat, which is a charity tax paid by Muslims to fund their social project. Then you have the jizya, a poll tax specifically for non-Muslims. By paying the jizya, local populations got religious freedom, state protection, and they were completely exempt from military service. The sheer brilliance here, and the big so what for any system managing diverse populations, is that this new tax rate was actually often lower than what these folks were paying under the previous Byzantine or Sassanid regimes. It was an incredibly effective trade-off of political submission for religious freedom. Now, with massive conquests comes massive revenue. To handle this incredible influx of wealth, Umar created the Diwan. Think of the Diwan less as a simple, dusty ledger, and way more like an early, highly sophisticated Ministry of Finance. It completely shifted the public treasury from an ad hoc distribution point into a highly systematic organ capable of managing complex state expenditures and paying out regular stipends to a standing military. Then we get to the third leader, Uthman, and he just slams on the accelerator. He introduces a wave of business-oriented reforms that honestly feels a bit like a modern venture capital boom. He lifted restrictions on buying land in conquered territories and used the public treasury to hand out interest-free loans for massive development projects. We're talking extensive water systems, brand new canals, and highways. He even appointed market officers to police commercial ethics. In fact, surprisingly, our sources note that during this era, women actually held prominent public-facing roles, including being appointed to oversee the busy market in Medina. But, as we're about to see, these exact economic policies were a massive double-edged sword. Which tragically brings us to Act 4. The consensus collapses. So remember those treasury loans Uthman authorized? Well, they ended up disproportionately benefiting the elite class, specifically Uthman's own Umayyad clan. This perception that the foundational, highly egalitarian social project of the Ummah had basically been corrupted by nepotism and wealth concentration created immense administrative friction. And this grievance boiled over, tragically resulting in Uthman's assassination. This single event absolutely shattered the community and sparked the first fitna, or civil war. By the time the fourth leader, Ali, took over, he wasn't just inheriting a grieving community, he was inheriting a total administrative collapse of that original consensus model. Ali desperately tried to hit reset and restore the community's original egalitarian spirit. But honestly, it was just too late. He was thwarted by deeply entrenched, defiant provincial governors, most notably a guy named Muawiyah in Damascus, who flat out refused to acknowledge central authority. This friction completely tore the state apart, marking the permanent transition away from a consultative leadership model and straight toward a dynastic empire. And that leaves us with a pretty profound final thought to chew on. The creation of the Ummah, those brilliant legal frameworks, the massive economic liberalization, these tools literally built a global empire at lightning speed. But is it possible that the very mechanisms of massive scale and explosive wealth were the exact same forces destined to break its original unified consensus? It is a fascinating look at the life cycle of administration. It really forces us to ask, do the very tools that fuel a system's rapid rise always contain the seeds of its eventual fracture?